Deep into a mountainous region, a young man is breathing hard as he carries a large pack of supplies on his back. He trudges behind a party of adventurers. One of the men complained that they still couldn't find a rockbird egg. The dark-haired man leading the group grits his teeth, asking why nobles even bothered wanting eggs from magical beasts. Rockbirds were giant, monstrous birds that resemble eagles. Isn't that a griffin then? They were ferocious, with excellent flying and combat abilities, but their numbers were few, making their eggs difficult to find. Before the group found themselves in the mountains, they stood before a man. The man had heard that the Black Thunder Guild would take on any request if someone offered a high enough reward. The man was a noble, and he offered to pay any amount as long as they could bring back a rockbird egg. The guild master of Black Thunder, Hayes, promised to deliver the egg to the noble with a bright smile. However, the young man who was carrying the large pack from before was also there, and he knew that although Hayes said he'd get the egg, finding one was an impossible task. Hayes had accepted the request that would normally be refused by other guilds, blinded by the reward amount. As for why the young man had found himself in such a guild, when he came from the countryside, he had yearned for the royal capital. He begged and pleaded with Hayes as a last resort and was led into that advanced guild, Black Thunder. But he had no talent for swords or magic, so he just kept doing odd jobs. It was the same that time too. He was chosen as a member of the egg search team. He was Yuto Dryg, Black Thunder's odd jobs and baggage handler. As always, he was selected as a baggage carrier during their long hike into the mountains for the egg, despite being already exhausted. Someone suddenly calls out to him, pointing out he was drenched in sweat. Well, yeah, that's one thing that happens when you're hiking in the middle of nowhere. A girl from the party loudly orders that if Yuto ruined the luggage with his sweat, he would be paying for all of it. Yuto apologizes, but he internally curses at the girl. Just because she was with Hayes, she was confident in bossing him around. Yuto starts to question if maybe joining the guild was a mistake in the first place. I wonder how long he's been in the guild only to start questioning that now. Suddenly, one of the party members points to an egg high above a cliff. Hayes looks at it and declares that it's the egg they were looking for. He orders Yuto to be the one to grab it. Yuto tries to argue that the place was quite dangerous for him to climb, but Hayes reasons that if a magical beast appears, he would be the least useful in a fight, so he was the most suitable person right then. He adds, quite unnecessarily, if it would be okay if someone else faced such danger. Yuto begrudgingly relents. He slowly starts scaling the cliffside, terrified. Yuto eventually reaches the egg, however, as he reaches out for it, he notices something odd. Before he could think about it too much, Hayes was already yelling for him to hurry up. He scales down the building and hands over the egg. Hayes swiftly held onto his so-called golden egg and announced to the party that they were celebrating big that night. However, Yuto calls out for their attention, saying that because of the pattern of the shell, he thinks the egg might be a rock lizard, not a rock bird. He tries to convince them to check it again carefully. However, all he gets in response are glares and dirty looks from the rest of the guild. Hayes sighs deeply and calls him a buzzkill. According to him and the rest of the party, it was clearly a rockbird egg no matter how anyone looked at it. Turning his back to Yuto, he declares that since they got the quest item, it was time for them to head back quickly. However, back in the guild hall, the noble exclaims angrily. His experts had just told him that the egg was from a weak magical beast called a rock lizard. That's funny, where have we heard that from? It sounds so familiar. He yells at Hayes, saying that despite calling themselves an advanced guild, they still couldn't tell eggs apart. Hayes bows low, trying to apologize, however the noble continues to yell that he was never requesting work from the Black Thunder Guild again, not even wanting the egg because it was just a weak beast. Calming down, the noble says that he'll report the incident to the Grand Master. Hayes snaps up in attention, panicked, asking the noble not to. His head hurriedly turns around and finds Yuto. Without a second thought, Hayes harshly yanks him over. Hayes forces Yuto to his knees and slams his head to the ground before the noble's feet. He claims that it was all Yuto's fault for insisting it was a rockbird egg. The audacity of this man is beyond explanation. He tells the noble that as guildmaster he thought to give Yuto a chance. Yuto, face pressed to the ground and bleeding, can't understand what he was saying. Hayes promises the noble that he was going to fire Yuto and begs him not to report to the Grand Master. The noble, merciful as he is, supposedly decides to turn a blind eye to the incident just that once, but he swears that he was never requesting from them again. Hayes thanks him and apologizes once more while lifting Yuto's head by his hair and slamming it back down to the ground. Only when the noble leaves does Hayes get up from his kneeling position and let go of Yuto's hair. He sighs in relief that they had avoided the worst possible scenario. Hayes frowns, preferring not to deal with the Baron and his unreasonable requests, although he did regret that he basically worked for free. He curses at the loss. Yuto struggles to get up from his place on the floor. He hesitantly starts talking, saying that Hayes' words from earlier were all lies, but Hayes cuts him off and tells him to shut up. Turning to Yuto, Hayes loudly declares that he would be taking responsibility for the mission failure, and would therefore be dismissed immediately. Yuto immediately exclaims in disbelief. He stands up and argues with Hayes that he was being unreasonable since he's been working for Black Thunder for 2 years. It's crazy that he stuck around for all that for 2 years. Hayes tells him to shut up again, pointing out that there were plenty of replacements for odd job workers like Yuto. He adds that he already promised the Baron earlier that he was going to be fired. Hayes delivers a punch to Yuto's stomach to shut him up. Yuto doubles over from the pain, clutching at his stomach. Hayes orders Yuto to leave the guild dormitories and informs him that he'll be removing the Black Thunder emblem from his license card. Hayes delivers him a final warning, ordering him to never show his face to them again. Yuto tries to say that he warned them about the egg, but they still hadn't listened. Grabbing him by his clothes once more, Hayes argues that he should have tried harder to stop him. Seeing how things are playing out right now, is he sure that he wouldn't have left Yuto for dead up in those mountains if he fought back? Hayes accuses Yuto of knowing that he'd be embarrassed and deliberately let him give the egg to the Baron, so naturally it was all his fault. 2 other guild members lift Yuto by his arms as Hayes orders for him to be thrown out. As Yuto hits the ground outside the guild building, someone chucks the rock lizard egg at him, saying that it was in lieu of his severance pay, and with that, they slam the doors on his face. Yuto sits on the ground, unable to believe all the injustice he just went through. He picks up the egg and speaks to it softly, saying that it had a rough time because of everything too. Thinking it pitiful to just abandon the egg right there, Yuto decides to take care of it for a while. Walking back to the dormitories, a voice welcomes him back with a drawl, calling him Mr. Useless. The more I hear about Yuto's time in the guild, the more I feel bad for him. 2 years of abuse, bro. It was the manager of the dormitories. With a smirk, the manager informs him that he put all his room belongings outside, commenting that he found it easy to move because Yuto didn't have much to begin with. After all, Yuto didn't have much money since he was paying rent he didn't have to. Yuto is confused with his statement. Sneering at him, the manager tells him that the dorms were free for any guild member to live in, but Yuto was the only one paying rent. The manager taunts him by saying that they never thought he was part of the guild, adding with a laugh that he was lucky to have income until they kicked Yuto out. Yuto doesn't have anything to say in reply. Eventually, the day is ending. Trudging down a dirty street, Yuto starts to wonder what he was really doing and why he wanted to go to the royal capital in the first place. He suddenly stops in front of a ragged-looking building, remembering that he needed a place to stay the night. The building was an old inn with a notice outside saying that staying over one night cost 5 copper coins. Seeing it was cheap enough, Yuto decides to settle there for the night. He heads inside and asks for a room. The old man at the counter takes one look at him before going back to his newspaper. He asks for 1 silver coin. Yuto is confused, voicing his thoughts that the sign up front had said 5 copper coins, but the old man cuts him off, saying that if he wanted to complain, he could leave. Yuto, surely the countryside was better than this. This city is awful. Just go home, bro. There's a pause before Yuto relents. Once he gets his room, he closes the door and collapses on the floor by the bed. He lets out a heavy sigh. He was completely spent, not even having the energy to look for another inn. Suddenly, he hears screaming from the other rooms. A voice yells that they were stabbed. Yuto listens as multiple voices start fighting, screams thrown in between. Realizing what was going on, Yuto is terrified as the screams intensify. He forces himself to calm down. Just then, the egg from his bag tilts over because of his shaking and bumps on his knee. He picks up the egg and places it on his lap, hoping that holding it would make him feel a bit better. He runs a gloved hand over the egg's shell. Yuto wonders aloud that the egg seemed different from a rock lizard, too. He couldn't remember the rock lizard egg pattern correctly, so he decides to check on it the next day. He holds the egg closer to himself, comforted by its warmth. Did this guy seriously forget that someone was being murdered in the next room or something? Before he knew it, sunlight was streaming in through the windows. Well, I'll be damned, he really did forget. Did he sleep through the screaming? Yuto blearily opens his eyes, surprised that it was already morning. He suddenly sits up, remembering that he had fallen asleep holding onto the egg. He checks on it immediately if it was okay, hoping he didn't crush it. It suddenly comes to mind that the egg hadn't cracked even a little bit when it was thrown at him back in the guild. Yuto starts to question if the egg wasn't even a rock lizard, but some new species of magical beast. However, he brushes the thought off immediately. Suddenly, a small crack appears on the shell. Yuto places the egg down on the floor, panicking that he really did crush it. However, the egg was moving. More and more cracks start to appear on the wobbling egg. Not before long, a large crack opens, small claws gripping to the outer shell as whatever was inside came out. A small lizard-like creature with tiny wings fully escapes its eggshell. Yuto stares at the creature and it stares back quietly, before throwing its tiny paws into the air with a toothy grin and sounds of greeting. Yuto coos at its cuteness as the newborn monster stands on its legs. It smiles at him once more, repeatedly making small noises. Excitedly wagging its tail, it jumps onto Yuto's lap, much to the man's surprise and embarrassment. Examining the creature, Yuto thinks how although he had initially thought it was a rock lizard, the size seemed to be bigger and more importantly, it had small wings. Maybe it was a subspecies. His thoughts are broken when someone loudly bangs on the door. It was the inn owner, roughly telling him it was checkout time and if he was still there he was getting charged a day extra. Yuto reassures him that he is leaving and the owner leaves him alone with a click of his tongue. The little monster frowns in annoyance at the disturbance. Yuto apologizes to it, especially since it was just born, and asks it to stay in his pack for the meantime. The little creature agrees readily. They go back to town. Yuto walks down the streets carefully holding his bag with his new friend inside in his arms. He starts to wonder what he was going to do from there, especially since the newborn monster seemed to recognize him as its parent from the moment it was born. He thought of raising it, but there was a problem. For an adventurer to walk around with a magical beast, a familiar contract through a guild was essential. And at that moment, Yuto wasn't part of any guild, so he couldn't make the contract. If it was stolen, he couldn't even file a complaint. He decides that he needs to join a guild somewhere. Just then, his bag starts to squirm and the little monster happily pops out with a chirp. How do you describe a little monster who goes coo all the time? Yuto flusteredly asks for it to go back to the bag. But as he passes an alley, two shifty-looking men smirk in his direction. He keeps walking while thinking about what to do next. Joining an advanced guild like Black Thunder was impossible, especially given how he just happened to get in by luck, brother. You begged them to take you in and got abused for 2 years. Nothing about that was luck. Yuto didn't accomplish anything while he was in Black Thunder, however, and so he remained an F rank. He wonders if he could get hired as labor in a mid-tier or weak guild. He continues to think deeply, not even noticing that the creature had poked its head out of his bag again. Yuto only snaps out of his thoughts when he realizes that they had strayed quite far from the main street. Suddenly, two men start coming up behind him. One of them points out that he was holding something nice. Yuto turns around to see two sneering faces looking down at his bag. They go on about how he was holding a rare magical beast that could maybe fetch a good price for being a rock lizard subspecies. They try to persuade him to hand over his bag. Yuto realizes with horror that he was being robbed. He nervously tries to tell them that he couldn't, but the men brush his words off and sarcastically say that they were tight on money and ask him again to hand over the magical beast since he could just find another one. Yuto thinks about his options, knowing that he couldn't just hand over the baby creature to the men. However, if they both attacked him, he wouldn't get away unscathed. The baby creature, oblivious to their situation, gives him a happy smile once more. Yuto tightens his hold on the bag and resolutely says that he couldn't give it away because the child was already his magical beast. The men pause before the broader and taller one of them orders the other one to keep an eye out for people coming. When the other man leaves, the man left with Yuto throws back his arm and delivers a punch right to Yuto's face. He takes it at full force, a large bruise blooming on his face. He remains standing as he clings to the bag. The man orders him to hand over the bag again as he readies to hit him one more time. Yuto grits his teeth. He looks the man dead in the eyes and refuses. The man is pissed with his response and brings out a short knife. He decided to take it by force, brother. You've been forcing yourself to get the baby all this time. What are you talking about? The man lunges for Yuto, knife ready. Yuto squeezes his eyes shut and braces for getting stabbed, but the little creature pops up from his arms and faces the man. Opening its mouth, light starts to form from within. Yuto stares in horror as flames burst from the baby's mouth. Given how close the man was, he takes the fire straight to the face, completely covering his body. Yuto blinks in shock and disbelief at the happy baby monster in his arms. The man is completely fried and drops to the floor out cold. I'm amazed he's not dead considering he took that full force. Yuto yells in disbelief, unable to tell where the fire came from. He turns to the baby and asks it if it was responsible, to which the little monster makes a sound of confirmation. Yuto starts to break down what he knows. Rock lizards didn't breathe fire. With its extraordinary attack power, it was hard to think of it as just some subspecies. He slowly pieces his clues together. Its tough eggshell, the wings on its back, and now its flames. Yuto was sure he had seen it in a book before. It was a magical beast far beyond a rockbird. Yuto stares in horror at the happy little creature in his arms. It was a legendary dragon. Just as Yuto was still barely recovering from his shock that he was holding an actual legendary dragon, the burnt man's accomplice comes immediately back from guarding the entrance to the alley, seeing his ally on the ground. While the man was busy attending to him, Yuto and the dragon slid by ever so slowly, trying not to get any attention and softly reassuring the man that the burnt man was still alive, which is definitely some comfort. He might have been charged with murder. When they're far away enough, Yuto immediately makes a break for it. Streets pass by them, and soon enough they find themselves hiding behind the wall of another building. Yuto waited for a while, making sure that they weren't being chased. I don't think that's possible when the bigger one of them is burnt to a crisp. He holds out the dragon in front of him and praises it for taking the man down in one hit. making the dragon let out a proud chirp. However, their conversation is cut short when the dragon's stomach lets out a loud growl. Remembering that the dragon hadn't had anything to eat since it was born, Yuto starts shifting around the bag and pulls out a dried piece of meat. He offers it to the dragon, who happily takes it. Watching it eat merrily, Yuto thinks how a dragon was a bundle of rarity, so if any more bad guys found out its true identity, it would be in danger far beyond what they had just experienced. Having finished the piece of dried meat, the dragon smiles at him again, absolutely melting at its cuteness. Completely understandable though. Yuto holds the dragon close and resolutely decides to protect the baby dragon. He figured that they might be targeted again, so it would be better for them to stay indoors for the meantime. He looks for a place that might hire even someone like him, and eventually ends up in front of a rather gloomy and shifty-looking building. A sign in front says it was the hall for Quilt's guild. Stealing his nerves, he throws the doors open and gets in. The guild hall was as expected, quests pinned to a board on the wall and tables for guild members to take a break in. Yuto keeps observing the building, glad that it wasn't any different from a normal guild. Suddenly a voice comes from in front of him. A girl at the front desk greets him to Quilt's guild. Her name was Quilt, master of the guild. Yuto walks closer to the counter and Quilt notices that he was injured. Time passes. Quilt had helped patch up his wounds behind the counter. Yuto thanks her, but she brushes off his words, saying that it was the natural thing to do. She's already 1,000 times better than Hayes, I see. She asks for his name, and when he introduces himself, Quilt asks what was troubling him, much to Yuto's surprise. Apparently, Quilt had seen him lurking around the entrance with a serious face. With a little push, Yuto tells her his story about being kicked out of Black Thunder. Quilt ponders out loud how she hadn't heard anything good about Black Thunder and pieces together that he got his injuries from them, or at least most of them. Quilt immediately offers him to join the guild, much to Yuto's surprise. Quilt reassures him that it was no problem. Rather, she asked that he join them, seeing as there was no one else there, and to be quite honest, they were shorthand on members. Yuto admits that he thought that the place was closed. Quilt admits on her end that she wasn't quite good with people and she started the guild herself, but she found being alone quite lonely. Quilt sheepishly admits that going back to the previous guild wasn't an option, so Yuto reassures her that he understood. With that, he agrees to join Quilt's guild. Quilt happily offers to update his license card right away, but Yuto suddenly cuts in, saying that there was one more thing he wanted to talk about, and that it was actually more important. He loosens the tie on his bag and immediately the baby dragon pops its head out of the opening. Quilt immediately coos at the sight of it. The dragon immediately walks across the counter and nuzzles up to her, wagging its tail. She wonders if it's a rock lizard, but she sees that its color was different, and it had wings, and with a start she realizes that the little baby was a dragon. Looking at its features, Quilt was just as sure as Yuto. She asks him where he found it. Petting its chin, Yuto explains that its egg was the reason he got kicked out of Black Thunder. He thought the egg was a rock lizard too, and so they pushed the responsibility on him. Quilt wisely says that those who collected magical beasts and those who sought to make money in the end without love and knowledge, they would miss out on the important things. Quilt is amazed at the realization. She asks him what he wanted to do with the baby dragon, and he immediately says that he intended to make a familiar contract. Quilt explains that although the idea sounds easy, the dragon wasn't just any magical beast. Dragons were rare because they lived in remote areas without human presence. There was no way nobles wouldn't target such a legendary creature. There was also no guarantee that it would grow up to be well-behaved. If a dragon went on a rampage, it would cause massive damage. The baby dragon was both a precious and dangerous creature. Quilt asks him if he would be able to take responsibility should a time come anything happens. Yuto pauses before curling his fists on his lap. He says that ever since he came to the royal capital, he hasn't had any good experiences. He's been treated terribly by various people, however, meeting the baby dragon and coming to Quilt's guild, he suddenly feels it all worth it. And so, Yuto pulls the baby dragon close to his chest and resolutely answers that if it ever harms people, he would absolutely atone for the crime, and to prevent that from ever happening, he would always stay by the baby's side. Quilt smiles at his answer. She agrees with his decision and decides to make the familiar contract right away. Yuto is rather confused with the tension from earlier suddenly disappearing. Quilt winks at him, saying that it was only a test to understand his resolve, but she was reassured when his feelings came through quite clearly. Quilt asks if he's decided on a name. Now that Yuto thought about it, with everything that happened to them, being kicked out of the guild and almost getting his newborn dragon stolen, he never got around to deciding on one. He mumbles to himself as he thinks before he stops. Yuto comes to the decision to call it Rock Bro with all that thinking. That's the best you came up with? Alright then. Rock chirps happily at the sound of its new name. Quilt agrees with the new name. She then asks Yuto to put his right hand on the desk and for Rock to put its left front leg on top of Yuto's hand. Quilt puts her hand over theirs and a light starts to glow from her touch. When it eventually fades, Yuto looks at the back of his hand to find a glowing emblem. The contract was complete, and with that, Yuto and Rock were officially partners. Quilt then asks him if he wanted to get his first quest. Excitedly, Yuto says that he'll do anything, even any tough job. Quilt warns him teasingly that he shouldn't say he would do anything, or he really might be ordered to do anything. Sis, what is that supposed to imply? I'm kinda scared. Yuto nervously promises to be more careful in the future. Turning back the conversation back to the main topic, Quilt assigns jackalope horns for Yuto's first quest. Jackalopes were also known as horned rabbits. Yuto's task was to defeat 5 jackalopes and to deliver 10 horns. The best hunting ground was Furoshuku Forest, which wasn't far off from the royal capital. Yuto excitedly tells Rock that they were going to do their best. In a rush, Quilt throws multiple gear Yuto's way. She hands him a map to the destination and a simpler map of the forest interior. She also adds a memo with important points to note and a backpack. And finally, a gift from her. Quilt pushes a sword towards him. Yuto holds it in his hands, both nervous but also excited at the sight of it. Quilt explains that an adventurer should have at least one weapon. It wasn't a special sword, but it was a fairly good quality one. Yuto is amazed that he was provided a sword too, given that he didn't remember ever getting anything similar during his time from Black Thunder. Bro, the only thing you could have gotten from that place was trauma and a possible concussion at the least. Yuto wonders to himself if that was what a normal guild felt like. Quilt apologizes to him that she could only prepare a longsword for him. Gradually, she promises that they would get him armor as well. I find it quite interesting that guilds in this world provided the adventurers with their gear. Usually, the adventurer should have their own. Quilt explains that this time around, since it was only meant to test his abilities, there was no penalty even if he failed. All that mattered was that both Yuto and Rock came back safe. Yuto promises that they'll come back in one piece. Yuto readies himself for the trip, a cloak over his shoulders and his new sword strapped to his waist. Yuto asks Rock to get in the backpack since it would be trouble if thieves set their eyes on it again. He asks for it to bear with it until they reach the forest. With that, Yuto and Rock bid Quilt goodbye. As the doors shut behind them, a silence comes over the guild hall as Quilt is left alone behind the front desk. In the next second, Quilt collapses on the counter with a heavy exhale, completely exhausted. She pouts, saying that playing the cool big sister role wasn't easy. Personally, I think you did a splendid job either way. She rolls around, voicing aloud how nervous she was. She ponders when was the last time she talked to someone that much, but she was very glad that she was able to muster up her once-in-a-lifetime courage. Quilt didn't have anything else to give, so she gave him her spare sword. Although she wondered if it was all right, she reasons that to ordinary people, it would be an ordinary sword. Why do I feel like that's implying a little something more? What if the person isn't ordinary, Quilt? Completely spent, Quilt decides on going to sleep, still sprawled on the front desk. Meanwhile, in the Black Thunder meeting room, Hayes had gathered his members. He reminds everyone that they had managed to anger Baron MacGuffin Zool, the one who requested a rockbird egg, but Black Thunder had mistakenly given him a rock lizard egg. Hayes says that it was all Yuto's fault. This guy seriously gaslit himself into believing it was all Yuto's fault. That it's almost insane. Hayes continues that he fired Yuto immediately, but that alone wouldn't restore their honor. He admits that he didn't like the Baron, but they needed to do something about their bad reputation. One of the members suggests that they need to find the egg and redeem themselves, but Hayes says that they'll also execute another plan at the same time. With a crazed look on his face, he declares that they would ambush and steal eggs found by other guilds. That way they could take it easy and others wouldn't be able to get the credit. This guy has completely lost his marbles. The other members are amazed at his thinking, which, to be honest, explains where Hayes gets all his pride from. Hayes orders his men to keep their eyes on other guilds because surely the Baron would make the request from other guilds as well. He tells them to report to him as soon as they find anything. Besides gaining information about that, the guild members are told to return to their regular duties and the meeting is over. However, seated in on the meeting, Hayes' girlfriend remains oddly quiet. Time passes and Yuto and Rock find themselves in the forest, the young man busy looking over the map Quilt had given him. Declaring that the area would be safe enough, Yuto lowers his backpack and allows Rock to come out. The little dragon runs out excitedly. Yuto calls out for it to not stray too far away from him, to which Rock lets out a chirp of agreement. But soon after, its little foot trips over a small jutting rock, quite funnily enough, and Rock is sent tumbling away, much to Yuto's panic. Rock hits the foot of a tree roughly and Yuto runs after him. He's about to ask if he was okay, but when he arrives, Rock greets him with a happy chirp. Yuto is reassured that Rock is fine, but the tree definitely was not. Yuto is amazed at a dragon's physical abilities, but his thoughts are cut short when he hears rustling close by. When he leans over, he finds a small furry creature with almost deer-like horns. It was a jackalope. Yuto gets up and readies his sword to get his first jackalope, but before he can do anything, Rock is lunging for it. The jackalope leaps out of the bushes ready for a fight, but Rock is faster and delivers a headbutt so powerful that it shatters the jackalope's horns. The horned rabbit falls to the ground, lifeless, and Rock chirps in victory. Yuto is shocked that Rock had taken the jackalope down in a single hit. He pets Rock's head and praises him for being amazing, making the little dragon pleased. Yuto couldn't believe that a single headbutt had that much power. Even though Rock had just been born, its body was already really tough. Kneeling down, Yuto asks if it was possible for Rock to aim at the body next time, to which Rock chirps in understanding. In another clump of bushes, they spot another furry creature with tall horns. Yuto points to the jackalope and tells Rock to aim for it. Rock lunges once more and the jackalope raises its head in alarm. The jackalope gets ready for Rock's attack, but after gathering some strength in its legs, Rock propels itself forward and flips into the air. Yuto watches it, mesmerized. When Rock is close enough, it flips and lands a powerful hit on the jackalope with its tail. Tiny baby dragon just tail slapped the life out of a rabbit. The jackalope lies dead, and Rock lands gracefully standing up. Yuto is completely amazed. He showers Rock with praises, much to Rock's enjoyment. Yuto excitedly pushes for them to take down more of the horned rabbits. Time passes, and pretty soon a few more horned rabbits are dead on the forest floor. Yuto counts all 5 of them, completing the quest requirements. Suddenly, Yuto notices that Rock was acting out of sorts, making sad chirps again and again. Yuto begins to immediately panic, asking the baby dragon if it had gotten injured. His questions are stopped at the sound of a very loud growl coming from Rock's stomach. "Bro, this is like the second time you've forgotten to feed the baby." Realizing that it was only just tired, Yuto apologizes for only noticing it then. He knows that, but it wasn't like he had much food left to feed it. He suddenly remembers the jackalopes. He wonders if they were edible. Although most magical beast meats weren't suited for human tastes, if it was a dragon, maybe things would be different. Yuto turns to Rock and asks if it wants to try and eat the rabbits. Opening its mouth, Rock delivers fierce flames into the pile of jackalope bodies. When the flames clear, it digs into its new meal, tail wagging in satisfaction. Yuto comments that it was eating with so much gusto. Sitting on a nearby rock, he decides to take a small break too. While Yuto jokes for Rock to not rush so much since no one was going to take its meal away, a shadowy figure appears from behind him, deep behind the forest foliage. A wolf-like monster slowly creeps closer to where Yuto was, who remained completely oblivious to the coming danger. Finally sensing the beast's presence, Rock chirps in alarm and readies itself for battle. Yuto immediately gets up at its aggression and he turns around to see the monster, which turned out to be a black wolf. Yuto questions why such a dangerous magical beast was in the forest. He's about to call to Rock for help, but Yuto suddenly remembers that the wolf was able to inflict curses with its claws and fangs. If they were attacked right then, Yuto wasn't sure how it would affect Rock. He curses, realizing that he had to fight alone. Yuto raises his sword, readying himself for battle. All of a sudden, the sword starts to emit a faint light. Yuto is so distracted by the glowing sword that he fails to notice the wolf advancing. The wolf lunges for him, and in his panic, Yuto stumbles back and falls to the ground. As a last-ditch effort, he swings his sword wildly. His slash turns the air into a solid blast of light. As it hits the wolf mid-jump, it completely slashes it clean in two. One strike and it was done. I don't know what I was thinking, but that wolf is terrifyingly huge. The wolf, now in 2 pieces, falls flat on the ground in front of where Yuto collapsed. Immediately, the black wolf is stripped of its fur and meat, and only its bones remain. Yuto sits there for a pause before he makes a dumbfounded sound in his confusion. He looks at his sword and with another pause, decides to sheath it for the moment. Quilt had said it wasn't anything special, but it was a sword that could shoot slashes. "Quilt, you absolute liar, OMG. His thoughts are disturbed at Rock's chirps. The baby dragon excitedly waves its arms at him. Yuto squats down and pets its head, glad that it wasn't hurt. The sword had truly saved them. Yuto decided that they needed to get ready to head back. Their iron rule was to return immediately after finishing the job. It really should be your iron rule considering how trouble just seemed to find you all the time. But before they could leave, Yuto turns to the black wolf's bones and decides that they needed to collect that too. He kneels down and finds a magic stone among the bones. Magic stones were formed inside magical beasts. By having them examined at the guild or other specific places, an adventurer could prove they defeated the beast. Oh, that's super cool. It's like a little memory crystal, except it records the moment of death, lol. With fangs, claws, magic stone in his backpack, not to mention the jackalope horns, it was already full and impossible to put Rock inside. Not having any other choice, he decides to wrap Rock in his cloak and carry him. Yuto asks Rock to be quiet on the carriage ride back. Time passes and they arrive in a small village. Yuto waits patiently by a tree with Rock. In the distance, he sees a horse-drawn carriage heading their way. However, he suddenly stops short when he notices that the adventurers guarding the carriage were from Black Thunder. Yuto sneaks by his ex-guildmates without being noticed to get to the carriage entrance. Thankfully enough, he's able to secure a seat. Suddenly, a little girl beside him asks if the creature in his arms was a lizard, surprising Yuto. Looking down, he finds that the cloak had loosened and Rock's head was poking out. The little girl exclaims that she thought the little creature was cute, and Yuto scrambles to explain that Rock was a lizard and his partner. He adds that she shouldn't worry because Rock didn't bite. The girl reaches over and tries to grab Rock's paws. As she pulls at him, the cloak falls even more and reveals its wings. The girl exclaims at the sight, but before anyone could hear her, Yuto loudly exclaims that Rock was a rare and unusual type of lizard, much to Rock's annoyance. Suddenly, the girl's mother reprimands her and tells her to be quiet. The mother turns to Yuto and apologizes for her daughter since she had fallen asleep and failed to notice that her daughter was disturbing him. Yuto reassures her that it was fine, just internally grateful that their cover wasn't blown yet. Yuto turns to Rock and apologizes for calling it a lizard, giving it pats to the head. Their carriage eventually stops somewhere as the horses took a break. Rock is bundled up in the cloak, fast asleep. Yuto wonders if he should get some sleep too. Just then, outside the carriage, one of the Black Thunder Guards turns to the forest as birds fly away and the trees shake. The horses on the carriage begin to whinny in panic, unsettled by something the coachman couldn't see. Suddenly, a large figure towering over the forest trees exits and corners the carriage. With a ferocious roar, a large man-like monster holding a gigantic club appears before them. The Black Thunder Guards at the top of the carriage scurry in fear at the sight of the giant troll. They question how a nearly B-rank monster was doing on their route. The passengers in the carriage panic at the sight of the monster. Yuto turns to Rock to find the dragon already awake. The Black Thunder members guarding their carriage were only D-rank, so there was no way just the three of them could defeat it. However, Yuto thinks that maybe if he and Rock worked together with them, they'd stand a chance, brother. You really snuck behind them earlier, and your main goal is to hide Rock from them. Why are you putting yourself out there for the world to see? Preparing themselves for a fight, Yuto and Rock exit the carriage. Yuto tries to talk to the members about taking down the giant troll, but before he can even near them, screams erupt. A sword cuts the horses free from the carriage. The Black Thunder members get on the horses and run away, screaming that they weren't able to fight such a monster. The coachman begs for them to return the horses, but they gallop away. Yuto stares in horror as the adventurers completely deserted them in the face of an enemy. The coachman collapses to the floor, convinced they were all going to die. But Yuto implores him to get up and return to the carriage due to how dangerous it was being outside. With the guards gone, the passengers are all terrified. Yuto puts a hand over his sword. The giant troll is hit on the head by a small pebble. When it looks down, its eyes land on Yuto and Rock. Yuto tosses a pebble into the air before mocking the monster. Almost immediately, the troll runs after him. Yuto successfully leads it away from the carriage full of passengers. Turning around to face their incoming enemy, Yuto initially relies on Rock. Rock immediately opens its mouth and breathes a blaze of flames right at the approaching troll. Yuto waits for the flames to clear, wondering if that was enough to do it in. Rock's power was on a whole different level compared to before. It was most likely its full firepower at the moment. The troll is silent for a pause, its body completely burnt. And in the second, it swings its bat wildly at Rock and Yuto. The two are able to dodge the attacks just in time. Yuto curses, realizing the monster took less damage than he thought. Its speed was also faster than expected. Rock could dodge the attacks easily, but Yuto was more vulnerable. Just one hit would be able to do major damage to him. He wonders if he'll be able to do it with the sword in his hands. He's shaking, but he forces himself not to be afraid. If he hesitated even a little bit, the passengers in the carriage would all be attacked. If he stopped there, then might never be able to again. He rushes in towards the troll. He slashes at the air. Like before, the air solidifies and strikes at the troll's knee. However, when the dust clears, all that's there is a gash across its knee. Yuto is horrified at the realization that its skin was hard, and his attack only scratched the surface. Before he could react, the club is swung and it hits him square in the side of his body. Yuto could barely react beyond a gasp of surprise before he's sent flying straight to the ground. He finds himself lying flat on the ground, Rock making panicked chirps beside him. All that was running in his head was the pain of his body, his thoughts a tangled mess. His left arm had gone numb and he couldn't move his body. As the giant troll slowly advanced towards him, he wondered if he was going to die right then and there. He was already mourning how he had just been given the opportunity to move forward as an adventurer. Suddenly, from the carriage, the little girl breathes in and she shouts with all her might for Yuto to not give up. Yuto slowly sobers up. More and more voices chime in from the carriage, trying to encourage him to keep going. From beside him, Rock continued to chirp out to him. Yuto's hand encloses around the sword's hilt, and using the blade, he pushes himself to stand back up, resolute that he couldn't fall there. With a terrifying glare, he promises to kill the giant troll. He rushes back into the fight just as he does so. Rock opens its mouth and softly roars. Unknown to Yuto, the emblem on the back of his hand that held his familiar contract glowed. He jumps into the air, sword blazing with light. He slashes and it solidifies once more, much more powerfully than before. The slash hits and, like the wolf, completely cuts the giant troll clean in two. The troll makes one last groan before its body hits the ground and begins to disintegrate. Yuto stands victoriously over its remains as Rock continues to chirp happily in their win beside him. Back in Black Thunder's guild, the D-rank member guards of the carriage burst into a room where Hayes was. Hayes is pissed at the sudden noise, but he notices that they were the ones who were supposed to be guarding a passenger carriage. He immediately confronts them on why they were already there and what happened to the escort mission. One of the men stumbles through his words. He nervously explains to Hayes that they were attacked by a giant troll and they barely managed to escape. Yep, using the carriage horses too. This guild is just filled with cowards, I see. The other guild members listening in are shocked. Hayes clicks his tongue, annoyed at the sudden problem. He barks out orders to members C rank and above to come with him, saying that they were cleaning everything up before other guilds catch wind of the problem. Timidly, one of the carriage guards asks if they should go back with them, which only pisses Hayes off more. Hayes then orders the remaining members in the guild hall to restrain the carriage guards. According to him, they had seriously violated protocol and were expecting to lose their heads over it. I'm just going to hope it's not the literal sense. But you don't always know with Hayes. The guards argue with him and ask if they should have stayed behind and died with the passengers. Hayes looks down at them, pointing out that if they hadn't fled and just died in the line of duty, the Black Thunder Guild could have minimized the scandal. But they just had to come crawling back. Hayes asks them sarcastically if they truly expected that there would be any mercy for anyone who tarnished their guild's reputation. The carriage guards, and I suppose now ex-guild members of Black Thunder, fall to their knees at a loss for a proper response. A member comes in and informs Hayes that their preparations were complete. Hayes orders that they were moving along the highway and searching for both the carriage and the giant troll. Since they were both quite large, they shouldn't be able to miss them. Hayes smirks darkly. Given their panic, it was possible that other guilds already knew how the Black Thunder members fled. Hayes needed to clean the problem up thoroughly. A crowd is gathered at the city gate. As Hayes had thought, other guilds had already caught on. But when his horse gallops closer to the entrance, he notices that everyone was just standing by the gateway. The crowd watches as a large carriage was hurriedly headed towards them at an incredible speed. It was Yuto's passenger carriage, and at the front, dragging the whole carriage along with it, was Rock, screaming in glee. Rock stops the carriage in time, right in front of the crowd gathered in front of the gate. The coachman and Yuto, who were sitting in front, breathed out a sigh of relief as they were able to make it back to the city. Yuto is amazed that Rock could pull that much weight. Back when they were still in the forest and Yuto was just realizing his victory over the giant troll, a stab of pain overtook his body. He screams with the pain of all his injuries, more so his arm. Managing to calm down somewhat, he starts to think of how, although they somehow managed to escape death, there was still a possibility more monsters might attack. It would be dangerous for them to just wait there for help. Just as he's thinking of a solution, Rock keeps chirping, trying to catch his attention. When he finally turns to it, Rock motions to the carriage. Yuto asks if Rock wanted to try and pull the carriage itself. He thinks of their options and the uncertainty of when help would arrive if they continued to stay there. Finally, he agrees and asks Rock if it could give it a try. The coachman and Yuto, arm now in a sling, sit at the front. Yuto takes hold of Rock's new reins as it gets ready to pull the carriage. Bracing its legs, Rock rushes forward with all of them in tow. Once they arrive back in the city, Yuto goes over to Rock and pats it on the head. He thanks it for helping them make it back to the city using its cleverness and strength. The coachman is almost in disbelief that they were able to make it back. He gets off the carriage and grabs Yuto by the shoulders, thanking him over and over before the coachman asks for his name. Yuto tells him that he was being a bit dramatic, but the coachman argues back that it was only right to know who he was since he saved them from certain death. Finally, Yuto introduces himself and Rock. The coachman thanks them again. Suddenly, the little girl pops up and offers a loaf of bread to Rock, who she lovingly calls Mr. Lizard. Yuto asks if she was sure, and she tells him that it was thank you for defeating the troll. The other passengers came forward as well, and before long, Yuto and Rock had a whole basket of food all to themselves. Just then, the coachman calls for his attention again. He informs him that he was going to file a complaint against Black Thunder for their breach of contract. He asks if Yuto was going to join them. Yuto agrees, although he admits that he would rather not see them, but his voice slowly fades away when he turns to his side. He suddenly says that it was no longer necessary, much to the coachman's surprise. With a rather loud voice, Yuto declares that Black Thunder was right there with them. He specifically points out their guildmaster, who was right there in the crowd. All eyes turn to look at Hayes. Hayes' expression is dark with barely suppressed anger. He clenches his fists and remains quiet before bowing lowly to the coachman, the guild members with him following suit. He apologizes for the trouble his guild members caused them and offers his apologies as the guild master. The coachman explodes in anger, refusing to accept his apology, especially since they almost died. He points out that they had hired 3 D-rank members, and all of them abandoned the carriage. He adds that the guild should return the horses the members stole. Hayes apologizes again before quickly ordering one of his men to bring back the horses. He bows before the coachman again and says that the 3 guards weren't properly trained members of the guild. He promises to immediately dismiss them, and that the guild would make sure it would never happen again. Damn. Now where have I heard that promise before? Sounds really familiar. The coachman continues that compared to the members of Black Thunder, Yuto and Rock were truly brave for defeating the giant troll. His words make Hayes pause. His head immediately whips around to Yuto, who was standing nearby. He repeats the coachman's words, almost unable to believe what Yuto had done. His mouth breaks into a smirk as he loudly proclaims that Black Thunder's Yuto Dryg just pulled off an incredible achievement. The audacity is truly a marvel to behold. The coachman is surprised to hear that Yuto is a part of Black Thunder, but Hayes continues that Yuto was a man with a strong sense of justice, so strong he even works on his days off. Hayes adds that he was the pride of their guild. Yuto watches on in shock as Hayes goes on about their guild, but Yuto very much remembered that he was fired the day before. Hayes was obviously trying to avoid lowering his guild's reputation. Hayes tells the coachman that Yuto was extremely capable and had been a great help to them. Not to mention he was an important member of the guild. He looks to Yuto for support on his story. Yuto finally speaks up and says that he truly was a member of Black Thunder until recently. Hayes flinches as the coachman asks for Yuto to elaborate. Yuto explains that Hayes had pushed all the responsibility to him when he failed the mission from the Baron. In the end, Yuto ended up getting fired. Hayes flinches back, realizing he was caught. Yuto continues, saying that it seemed like Hayes was trying to cover up the incident and pretend it never happened. However, Yuto informs them that he was already a member of a different guild. He holds out his adventurer's license card. Showing it up to them, Yuto says that he was already part of a respectable guild called Quilt's Guild. Quilt, your new hire is doing amazing work marketing your guild. I'm so proud of you guys. Hayes hears the murmurs of the other guilds behind him as they whisper how Yuto was just fired, and Black Thunder basically ran away. Trying to salvage their reputation still, Hayes reasons that at the time it was their only way to contain the situation. He tells Yuto that he still thought of him as a comrade. Hayes asks him to consider coming back. Yuto tells him that he was in Black Thunder for 2 whole years, but it was only after joining another guild that he realized he was just being used under the guise of training. Bro, hold on a minute, they told him he was under training, doing chores for 2 whole years? His time there keeps getting worse. Yuto says that he was basically a disposable pawn to be discarded when things got tough. Yuto adds that he didn't intend to debate the legitimacy of his dismissal there and just wanted to testify that Hayes was a man who easily lies to avoid responsibility. Hayes tries his best to keep his emotions in check. Suddenly, Yuto calls for Hayes' attention once more and all but orders him to report the failure to the Grand Master himself. Hayes tries to argue back immediately. Yuto cuts him off, stating that it was fortunate that there were no casualties in the incident. Gotta love that he glosses over the fact he almost died for a few seconds there. The guild wouldn't be disbanded immediately, so Yuto asks him why he was hesitating unless he had something else he was hiding. Voice shaking, Hayes steels himself before stating clearer that it was nothing like that. Yuto repeats his request for Hayes to report it to the Grand Master, which is almost an order, not gonna lie. Hayes agrees through gritted teeth. If Yuto continued to push him any further, there was no telling what Hayes might do. Yuto decides to stop there. Brushing all the tension off, Yuto announces that compensation would be arranged and tells everyone to wrap it up. The coachman bows to Yuto again, thanking him once more, but Yuto reassures him that he did it for his own sake as well. The crowd disperses. Seeing as all the commotion was over, however, some figures seem to linger and watch. Yuto had realized that some people have realized that Rock wasn't just any ordinary magical beast. He resolves to be more careful. Yuto thinks that Hayes must also have made some predictions about Rock's true identity, and so he had to keep an eye on his movements. Yuto finishes off his request from Hayes on what to report to the Grand Master, adding that Quilt's guild would be collecting the reward for the giant troll. Get that money, Quilt. Hayes replies curtly to his words. With that, Yuto and Rock head out to grab their backpack. As the members of Black Thunder hesitantly come towards the guildmaster, Hayes delivers a dark and deadly glare to Yuto's retreating back. Internally, Yuto thinks about how the old him wouldn't have been able to do something so bold. He never really knew what life had in store. Yuto tells Rock that they were going back to their guild, Rock happily agreeing as it holds up their basket of gifts. Yuto follows with a smile as Rock leads their way back to the guild, parading around their basket of food. As they near the doors to the guild hall, Yuto praises Rock for remembering their way back. They enter the building and announce their arrival. As Yuto enters deeper and heads to the front desk, he sees locks of hair hanging down. He finds himself panicking at the sight of Quilt, passed out over the counter. Because of his shouting, Quilt starts to blearily wake up. Fully opening her eyes, she spots Yuto in front of her and stands up in a rush, asking what happened. Yuto counters that he should be the one asking what on earth happened to her. Quilt awkwardly laughs, admitting that she just dozed off a little. Realizing what she said, she clarifies that she didn't usually sleep in places like that. She defends herself that she wasn't normally that lazy. Quickly changing topics, Quilt directs the conversation to his quest. But just as quickly, she notices his arm that was on a sling, seemingly worse off than when she had sent him on his way to his first adventure. Dragging him by the arm, Quilt urges them to treat his injuries as soon as possible. Time passes as they find themselves behind the front desk again, and Quilt helps Yuto. She's amazed at the realization that she had just healed him in almost the same day. Can't believe everything that Yuto's been through has been the span of 2 days at most. Yuto apologizes for the trouble. Quilt reassures him that it was all right. However, she still couldn't quite believe everything that happened to him. From what she knew, black wolves and giant trolls usually didn't appear very frequently. There was a possibility that a stronger magical beast appeared and drove them out of their home, most likely a stronger magical beast than the troll. Yuto's face darkens in horror at the thought of it. Quilt reassures him that it was all just speculation, but it wouldn't hurt for him to stay careful. Quilt praises his amazing ability to defeat the two monsters. She's heard that he almost had no combat experience to speak of, but normal people would have ran off. Quilt praises him some more, which Yuto tries to refuse. Yuto suddenly remembers the sword and Quilt assumes he had a hard time using it. He explains that it was rather the opposite. Whenever he used it, it would glow and shoot out solid slashes at the enemy. Yuto was sure that Quilt knew something about it. Quilt is amazed to hear that Yuto was able to draw out the sword's power, which makes Yuto question its origins even more. Quilt laughs, saying that of course she knew what the sword was since she had one of her own. Yuto marvels at Quilt's sword as she puts it on the desk. It was similar in design as the one Yuto received. Quilt tells him that the one he used was a spare that was hardly used. Meanwhile, she picks up her own sword, and when she raises a hand to the blade, Yuto notes that the pattern was different from his. Yuto is about to ask Quilt again the power of the swords when she point-blank tells him that she didn't know either, unable to understand the principle behind it. But if there was one thing she could tell him, it was that the swords were made from a dragon's fang. Both Yuto and Rock are shocked at the revelation. Kinda wild to find out that the sword you're carrying could most likely be a relative of your magical creature partner. Quilt confirms that the twin swords were forged from the single fang of a dragon. In a panic, Quilt clarifies that they hadn't killed the dragon to get the tooth. If anything, she had almost died during the fight. Back then, as a youth, she had felt like she would be able to win against anything. She laughs at the memory of how after breaking off the fang, the dragon ended up kicking their asses, quite surprised that you're not dead yet, Quilt. Yuto asks her in disbelief why she had handed him such an amazing item. Awkwardly, Quilt reasons that it was the only one she had on hand. She didn't want him to leave empty-handed, but also couldn't reveal that she had nothing to give. Finally, she couldn't take it, and she admits that she gave it away to save face. Yuto couldn't believe that she gave away such a sword just to save face. Quilt reassures him that she wasn't trying to fool or surprise him in any way since the sword was an ordinary and sturdy sword to ordinary people. She tells him that the sword only shows its true power as a response to the wielder's strength. It meant that the sword had recognized Yuto as its owner. He has two dragons recognizing him now. Quilt explains that it would be like the sword reacting to all his experiences thus far. Yuto hopes that that was the case. Suddenly remembering something, Quilt gets up and opens a drawer. She produces a small pouch filled with gold coins from the desk. It was his reward for the quest, but Yuto is surprised at such a large amount. He says that he appreciates the thought, but he worries that it was a bit too much and might be a breach of guild regulations. Quilt argues that it was just the right amount, including his bonus for being promoted into D rank. Yuto was shocked that he was already in D rank. Quilt reminds him that he took down a giant troll, so it was only right for his combat level. She asks him if he was paid back when he was still in Black Thunder, and Yuto reassures her that he was. It was just that he was paid enough to get by through the month. Quilt tells him that he should still have been paid fairly even if he was only a baggage carrier, especially if he was hardworking. Seeing how surprised he was just by that amount, it was obvious to her that he's been unfairly underpaid until then. The people running Black Thunder truly needed to learn a lesson, Hayes. I swear you're going to catch these hands. Yuto is speechless, so Quilt goes on to say that the reward and the D-rank promotion were only natural. She tells him to hold his head up high as she offers the pouch of gold back to him. There's a pause and then a sniffle. Quilt bursts into panic as Yuto starts to cry. She asks him if her face was too scary because she often heard that her angry face makes people want to cry. Instead, Yuto reassures her that he was only crying because he was happy. This man deserves a year-long break, OMG. Ever since he had come to the royal capital, he's never been treated well. He didn't realize how much he was pushing himself unconsciously. Suddenly, Quilt lunges for him and traps him into a hug. Rock following not too long. Quilt and Rock hold on to Yuto. She promises that he never has to suffer like that anymore, and she would absolutely not let him push himself like that again. Yuto is flustered at their closeness but thanks Quilt nonetheless. When she pulls away, Yuto thanks Rock for its comfort as well. With things settled, Quilt declares that the rest be left up to her and she tells him to rest for a while to heal his injuries. Yuto immediately negatively reacts to the idea of not working and just resting. He tries to say that he can still work, but suddenly Quilt comes closer to him with a dark and terrifying smile. She reminds him that she just swore that she would not let him do that. She reminds him that their first priority was to heal his injuries. Yuto meekly relents. Quilt asks him if he had a place to stay, and he mentions that when he was fired, he also got kicked out of the dorms. Quilt tells him to just live there in the guild hall instead. There were plenty of empty rooms, and as he could see, there was really no one to fight him for it, so his choices were endless. He asks how much the rent would be, and Quilt of course says that it was for free since he was a member of the guild. He was working there, so there was definitely no need for it at all. Hearing that, Yuto gratefully accepts the offer. As he climbs up the stairs for the second floor, Quilt calls out to him to say that he was staying in room number 1. It was already furnished to some extent and was just recently cleaned. Having reached his new room, Yuto enters. His eyes glitter at the sight of the spacious room all for him and without needing to pay anything. Suddenly, Yuto hears Rock's chirps. He turns to find it messing with the shutters of the window. When they both looked out, they found themselves having quite a view of the street from there. Yuto flops down on the bed out of exhaustion. Rock comes up to his side and Yuto offers for them to sleep together. Rock immediately curls up beside him. Yuto's eyes are heavy from the long day. A lot had happened, but Yuto was grateful for having ended up where he was. Meanwhile, in Black Thunder, a fist slams roughly into a table. Hayes starts the meeting by saying that it truly was an unfortunate day that they had to hold 2 emergency meetings on the same day. Personally, I am relishing his annoyance. His whole face tenses more as he glares, asking his members if they knew the topic for their meeting. The Black Thunder Guild members stay quiet in their fear. Hayes continues to say that because of their 3 guild members, whose names he'd already forgotten. Black Thunder was sworn to report to the Grand Master, not to mention in public. Hayes grits his teeth, wanting to curse at Yuto, but he calms himself enough to put him aside so they could focus on their main problem. They couldn't avoid reporting to the Grand Master. Hayes informs them that he'd already taken care of the report before the meeting, making the members breathe out in relief. But almost immediately they tense up again as Hayes tells them it's too early to relax. Desertion in the face of the enemy was a serious violation of discipline. At that rate, an auditor was sure to be sent from the Grand Guild. If they were inspected in their current state, their guild's already poor reputation would surely plummet. Even if they avoided dissolution, it was still possible for Black Thunder's advanced certification to be revoked. Hayes orders everyone to dispose of anything unfavorable before the auditor arrives. They weren't to try and put on a good face unnecessarily, or they'll be seen through immediately. Hayes tells them to get through the week as plainly and uneventfully as possible, to which the members swear to with a salute. Hayes shouts for them to also keep the guild clean because it's been so dirty. He asks who is in charge of cleaning. Timidly, one of the members raises a hand and says that Yuto always used to do cleaning and managing supplies, so no one has been doing it. The answer angers Hayes as he asks if they were trying to say that it couldn't be helped just because Yuto was gone. The member shrinks back in fear of him. Besides that, he reinstates that it was their time to lay low. They only had to endure it for a week, and after that, they could return to their usual guild operations. He adds for them to not let their guard down too much. With a final warning and wearing a sinister smile, he reminds them what would happen if they lose their advanced certification because of any of their actions. They salute again, although nervously, and Hayes adjourns the meeting and tells them to start cleaning. Hayes exits the meeting room and another voice comes up from behind him, asking when he was going to take them on their next adventure. It was Hayes' girlfriend, Shul. Arms crossed, she pointedly says she only joined Black Thunder because he said that she'd see rare magical beasts. Hayes apologizes to her, but he reasons that the guild's survival was at stake at that moment, and he asks her to be patient for a while. With a frown, Shul says that she would just go on an adventure with someone else instead of him. Hayes jokes that she was openly cheating on him, to which Shul immediately gets angry at since she was only suggesting an alternative since he said he couldn't come along. Hayes laughs, asking her not to get so angry. Internally, he thinks that if he didn't find her so good-looking, he would have hit her. Excuse me? What? In Hayes' perspective, Shul's brains and magical skills were below average, but her looks were really something. I hate hearing about other people from this guy's head. From what Hayes had seen, she was beautiful enough to turn heads in the royal capital, regardless of gender. She was rather selfish, but Hayes thought that just having her on his arm was valuable. Hayes brings up that a member named El Rocco should be going on a regular survey to the Altatum ruins, and he offers for Shul to join him. It was a place filled with ancient artifacts. There were things just lying around that current experts couldn't even comprehend. To top it all off, Hayes tells Shul that the magical beasts living there have also evolved uniquely. The words seem to catch Shul in a trance, and with almost no hesitation she agrees to join the expedition. She turns back around, announcing that she was going back to the dorms, and Hayes bids her goodnight. Hayes holds the smile on his face for a second more before it drops into his usual frown. He mutters that if he didn't find her angry face so cute as well, he would have hit her. Excuse me? What? Hayes eventually brushes the idea off because to him he could just train her little by little. Both her and the future of the Black Thunder Guild. This man genuinely needs an intervention. Whether psychological or divine, it doesn't matter. He needs to be stopped. Time passes, and Yuto and Rock start the day off by doing some stretching. As he stretches his left arm, Yuto is amazed that the injuries from the giant troll were completely healed using healing magic. He never expected Quilt to bring a healer, better yet, it was essentially free, the cost covered by the guild. However, Quilt made sure to kindly threaten him that if he was thinking of getting back to work right away because he was healed, she wasn't letting him. She pushes for him to rest for a while, and Yuto nervously agrees. As Yuto and Rock descend the stairs to the main guild hall, Quilt greets him a good morning and asks how he was feeling. Yuto says that thanks to her, he was back to being full of energy. Quilt admits that she felt bad for telling him to rest, but she asks him if he could go to town for a bit. Apparently, Quilt wanted to get him a full set of armor before his next adventure. Oh hell yeah, brother is getting suited up. Yuto is surprised and tries to say that he already received some and that he didn't have the budget to cover the costs for a new set. But Quilt slams her hands on the table and tells him that the ones he had were just temporary and that they needed to properly prepare armor that suited him. Custom-made armor took time, so she wanted to get him measured early. She adds that he shouldn't worry about the money because the guild was covering the costs, so she warns him not to choose the cheaper options. About the armor workshop, Quilt asks if he had any places in mind. If he didn't have any preferences, she could recommend her favorite. Apparently, Quilt had the sword made there as well. Quilt informs him that they were rather skilled, but a bit eccentric. Plus, they were handling several high-paying requests. Yuto tries to say that maybe asking them was asking for too much, but Quilt adds that the person had a craftsman's spirit, so if there was a rare material, she thinks they'll bite and easily take it on. Yuto just nods along to her words, but Quilt asks why he was acting so impressed like it was someone else's business. After all, she was sure that he was carrying around a special material of his own. Yuto is confused for a second before his eyes land on Rock. Quilt was referring to the shells of Rock's egg. There was nothing rarer than dragon material. In this case, the eggshell. Yuto asks how she noticed that he had the eggshell. Quilt explains that when they first met, she heard a hard sound coming from Yuto's luggage that was a bit different from metal, and when she saw Rock, she immediately knew what it was. Yuto is amazed at her skills of deduction from just hearing the sound, his praise making Quilt bashful. Placing the eggshell onto the front desk table, Yuto explains that he just packed all the shells he could collect. Quilt observes that it was still sturdy even after time had passed. She says that it was as expected of a dragon egg, praising Rock and making the little dragon puff out a harumph of pride. Quilt says that the workshop was popular, so she'll prepare a letter of introduction to help him make his request smoothly. She wonders if he'll need a map, but decides that he probably won't need one since there were signs all along the way. Once he was close enough, he would be able to spot it easily. Yuto makes sure to ask if it was okay to bring a magical beast into the workshop, and Quilt reassures him that it was fine since they dealt with weapons and armor for magical beasts too. Quilt makes sure to remind Rock not to fight any of the other magical beasts in the shop, to which Rock agrees. Yuto bids Quilt goodbye as he and Rock head for the workshop. Pretty soon they arrive in a large establishment called Kobo's workshop. The place had all kinds of weapons lining up the walls, headwear and armor put up on display. Yuto marvels at how big the workshop was. When he gets to the front, the woman at the front desk asks his purpose for visiting and if he had a letter of introduction. Handing over the letter from Quilt, Yuto states that he was there for armor creation. The lady tells him to take a number and wait by the sitting area. He had just sat down when his number was immediately called, much to the annoyance of the others around him. Another woman working at the workshop leads him down corridors and into another room. When he enters, another person is already there. He introduces himself as Kobo Lebkuchen and informs Yuto that he's read the introduction letter carefully. Yuto was expecting a master craftsman to be an even older man. I know Kobo looks like a woman, but Yuto refers to him as a man, so that's what we're doing, I guess. When Kobo heard it was Quilt's introduction, he wondered what kind of person Yuto would be. Suddenly, he leans impossibly closer to Yuto. Regarding him with great interest, Kobo laughs and calls Yuto cute, adding that Quilt was finally keeping a so-called young sparrow around. Hey, keep the personal space sacred, please. Yuto immediately takes multiple steps back, denying Kobo's words and defending himself and Quilt that she had just hired him after he was fired. So there was no such relationship between them. Kobo nods in mock understanding, even as Yuto continues to deny it. Kobo jokes that if he wasn't so busy, he'd keep a man too, but he found work the most fun. Suddenly, Kobo gets serious and tells Yuto that even with an introduction letter, he couldn't prioritize him, so he just had to patiently wait until his turn came. Yuto is confused since Quilt had said that there wouldn't be a problem. Before Kobo could leave, Yuto calls out to him and asks if the material was mentioned in the introduction letter. Kobo freezes. Yuto explains that Quilt had told him that Kobo would listen if he had a rare material with him. Starting to piece things together, Kobo admits that he thought it was strange for Quilt to send an introduction letter, thinking that Yuto must just have been a favorite. He orders for Yuto to show him the material, and then he'd decide if it was something he wanted to work with. They move to a sitting area, Yuto placing Rock's eggshells on the table. Kobo picks up a piece and determines that it was an eggshell from a magical beast, the pattern similar to a rock lizard or a rock bird, but still neither. Yuto is internally amazed at Kobo's deductions in an instant. Finally, Kobo gives up and asks what kind of egg it was. Yuto plainly states that it was a dragon egg. Kobo pauses, wondering if he heard wrong before asking him to repeat himself. Yuto repeats that it was a dragon egg. Frowning at him, Kobo tells him that he had some nerve coming there to tell such a bold-faced lie. Yuto is about to defend himself when Rock pops out from Yuto's backpack. Yuto greets the dragon, but he doesn't notice Kobo flinching. Yuto, deciding that if Kobo sees Rock, he would surely believe him, takes Rock from his backpack and holds him securely in his hands. He tries to introduce Rock, but is immediately cut off. Kobo shrieks back in fear at the sight of a magical beast, jumping to the very end of the sofa just to be as far away as possible. A shivering Kobo tells Yuto that he was terrified of live magical beasts. Yuto is confused since he made equipment for magical beasts. Kobo explains that the staff did the measurements and he would just confirm it from afar, and that was how he always did it. Holding up Rock, Yuto asks Kobo to confirm from a distance that it was definitely a dragon and the shell was real. Kobo shrieks again, asking Yuto not to bring Rock any closer. Hiding behind the sofa, Kobo asks if showing Rock was payback for teasing Yuto earlier. He lightly threatens Rock to stay away. Yuto says that Rock was a child that understands and adds that he wouldn't let Rock come any closer to Kobo. From his place behind the sofa, Kobo observes Rock's scales and wings, noting that those features were definitely dragon-like. He says that he's never seen a young one before. Yuto asks him if Kobo finally believes him. With a sigh, Kobo sighs and surrenders, admitting that he was curious about the shell the moment he saw it. With a crazed glint in his eyes, Kobo is amazed that it was undoubtedly the real thing, and even at that moment, he was itching to touch it. Yuto is more amazed at how devoted Kobo was to his work. Yuto asks about the request again, and this time Kobo replies that he would make it right away. When Yuto thanks him excitedly, Rock makes an excited chirp, and Kobo wails for it to not cry out. Yuto reassures him that he was holding on to Rock properly, and Kobo all but begs him to please do so. Going back to the egg, Kobo says that at a glance, maintaining the egg's strength while processing it, he was rather sure he couldn't make a full body armor. Yuto's surprised he could already tell that much. Kobo reasons that since they couldn't use it for the whole body, they would make armor to protect the necessary parts. He recommends a helm and a chest plate, to which Yuto agrees with the plans. Kobo asks what kind of design he wanted since he would be able to accommodate some requests. When Yuto answers, his voice is wobbly and comes out as a mumble, so Kobo asks him to repeat himself. In a louder voice and with a red face, he asks to have a cool design. Kobo laughs at his boyish nature before promising to make some cool armor that would suit him. Yuto thanks him. As for the delivery time, Kobo informs him that it would most likely take around a week. Given the material, it'll need some time to create. Yuto readily replies that it was all fine and for Kobo to proceed at his own pace. Suddenly, with a dark grin, Kobo says that he'll send the bill over to Quilt. Since she wasn't one to waste money, Kobo said she would have plenty, and so he was going to milk her for all she was worth. Solemnly, Yuto apologizes to Quilt in his thoughts. With that, the request was settled. Kobo tells him to look forward to the forward product. Rock chirps out in delight and Kobo lets out a small shriek. He promises to make good use of Rock's shell, so he asks Rock to not get too rowdy. Kobo tells Yuto that they were going to take his measurements, and then he would be able to go home. Yuto is surprised to suddenly find a staff member beside him, but he agrees nonetheless. Later on, as they walk down the streets, Yuto is just thinking about reporting to Quilt that he was able to place the order when his stomach lets out a loud growl. Holding his stomach, he realizes that he hadn't had any to eat since that morning. Rock pops out of his backpack and remakes the same sound of his stomach, which makes Yuto flustered. Continuing to walk, he decides that he needs to find something to eat. Suddenly, he slams his face into the window near him, which appeared to be the inside to a bakery. He starts to drool. It was the bakery he always wanted to visit. Until then, he could only look because he didn't have any money. But now he had some extra in his pocket. Yuto tells Rock that he was going into the store and asks him if he could stay still until he finished shopping. Time passes and Yuto bites into a loaf of bread. His eyes sparkle at the delicious meal. It was completely different from cheap bread. He asks if Rock thought it was good too. The little dragon was seated inside his backpack, happily munching away at his own bread. In a paper bag beside them, Yuto had also saved enough for Quilt. As they walk back to the guild, Yuto tells Rock that they were going to eat their fill more and more from then on. Finally, they get back to the guild and announce their arrival. Quilt swiftly sits back up and welcomes them back. She was definitely not asleep on the front desk again. Yes, of course not. Quilt asks how his request went, and he informs her that he was able to place the order, though he was a little scared about the bill. Quilt reassures him that she would pay for it, so there was no need to worry about it. Yuto remembers the bread they had bought for lunch, and he hands over the paper bag for Quilt. She thanks him for the bread, but suddenly asks if he was free the next day. Quilt had a request she wanted to entrust to him. Apparently it was a survey of some ruins, but she would explain the details the next day. Yuto agrees, and he and Rock make their way back to their room. Quilt watches them go with a soft smile. From then on, he was going to keep on getting stronger. Yuto would face even more painful and sad experiences than what he had already gone through. But he and Rock, who managed to defeat even a giant troll by working together, Quilt believed they could overcome any difficulty.